Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Now apologies for those who are long-time viewers of the channel. You'll probably have noticed lately my content has been a little bit thin on the ground, and that's because there's an awful lot going on in my day-to-day life right now. But I am meaning to get back into the game shortly. In the meantime, I'm probably just going to drop a handful of videos whilst I get back up to speed. But don't worry, everything is on course and hopefully in a few weeks' time, normal service will resume. So today, for Star Trek Sundays, I thought it would be fun to take a look back at one of my personal favourite Star Trek figures in my collection. And this is once again looking back to the Playmates action figure line of the 1990s. And today's offering is coming from the 12-inch line and was an exclusive through kbkids.com in the US. Now, I don't think KB exists anymore in the US, I may be wrong on that, but this was exclusive to them at the time. And they produced two figures in this line dedicated to the Wrath of Khan. And we had Admiral Kirk and Captain Spock. Sadly, there would be no other characters released in this subline, so there were no other figures released associated with this film, so no Khan and none of the other crew. And of course, this exclusivity to kbkids.com has definitely made these figures quite scarce, quite hard to get hold of, and fetch some pretty high prices these days on the secondary market. So let's take a look at this packaging. Now, you will see, of course, that the packaging is the standard 12-inch line fare that we're used to seeing for this line, and it has that sort of diagonal, sort of oblong, slightly misshapen kind of shape to this packaging. It's kind of hard to describe. It's sort of slanted in some ways down that side panel there. That's at a slight diagonal, and the rest of the box is kind of like a trapezoid kind of shape. It kind of narrows at the top and broadens out at the base, and that's how you have to open this figure up through the base and not through the top. Quite an interesting look. I really like the colours and the layout and the design that they've used for this packaging. I think it looks absolutely fantastic, not just on this figure but across the entire line. I thought it was really creative and inventive and captures the spirit of each series or film very nicely. And here we have this nice sort of nebula cloud that we see in the Wrath of Khan. We see the nice purples and the reds, but then we also have the starfield and some planetoids in the background. Of course, we have that window display there so we can see Admiral Kirk up front and centre, and then on that side panel there we can see the Enterprise A looking pretty glorious. And of course, this is the only time we'd see this version of the Enterprise on any of the Playmates packaging for the 12-inch line. The other side panel is surprisingly void. There's not an awful lot here. It is largely text-free. We do have the name of the character, we have the name of the film, of course, and then we just have the rest of the design of the nebula and the starfield wrapping around. It is a shame that we couldn't see something here, like maybe an image of the Enterprise would have been really cool. But nevertheless, at least this is pretty interesting. At least it looks different from the other figures in this line. So if you do decide to put this on your shelf, on its side, it is going to look different and stand out. If we look at the reverse of the packaging, this is going to be very familiar for anyone who's bought any of the other figures in the 12-inch line, because yes, it is the standard Star Trek history, the history of the show up to that point across all of its various iterations. Very text heavy. I've noted this before in the past. It's kind of an unusual tack that they took, especially for the time, which was much more child orientated than it would be today. But definitely, I think Playmates were trying to walk this tightrope of pleasing two audiences simultaneously. They were aware that they had to please the child audience, which accounts for some of the more toyetic elements that we see in these lines, but at the same time they were very conscious of the adult collectors as well. And this, to me, I think is an olive branch to what they saw as the adult collectors who would want a little bit more depth and texture when it comes to, I suppose, the history and what they were getting from this packaging. So an unusual choice, kind of interesting, but there's nothing new here if you've bought any of the others in the line. And then if we return to the front of the packaging, for me, the pièce de résistance, I love this, and I love the level of attention and care that went into this packaging, the way they thought this through, because you can open that gatefold cover up and we can see the enlarged window display on the inside. We can see more of the Enterprise A in all its glory, and it does look really beautifully illustrated here, I have to say. So of course we can see the figure there looking pretty cool, but then on this left-hand side we have some more text as well, specifically about Kirk and his role in the Wrath of Khan. This is really nice stuff, very presentable, and looks absolutely fantastic on display. Okay, so let's open him up and take a look at the figure himself. Now, the first thing you're going to notice, of course, it is the standard body type they used on all of the male action figures in the 12-inch line. So there's nothing really new here, and maybe it's not entirely appropriate, but it does work for the most part. Now, when we take a look at the likeness, the sculpting, it's not bad. I think there's a passing resemblance here to William Shatner as he appears in The Wrath of Khan, but as we tend to know, at this point in the 90s when they did 12-inch figures, the likenesses tended to be a little bit soft when it came to detail. Now, that's significant here because, yeah, we're missing a lot of the nuance from Admiral Kirk's face. We're missing some of the lines there and the extra detail that would really enhance this portrait, the sculpt a lot more, and give him a lot more of the character and make him look more like William Shatner at this point in his career. Unfortunately, this just feels a little bit too soft. I wouldn't say it's a great likeness. It's passable, I would say. But let's move on. Because I have to say, I think the costuming and the tailoring on this figure is probably some of the best that we ever saw from Playmates, regardless of scale. This is absolutely fantastic. I love this outfit, and a lot of love and care has gone into it. It's a very nice, thick, heavy cotton material, and it has a lot of depth and texture. You'll notice there is this strap on the top shoulder here. This is a separate piece. This is actually pinned in place by a plastic clasp. You can unclasp this and pull the vest jacket down, which is very cool. The only sad thing is that you can't hold it in place, so this will have a tendency to flap back up, so it's kind of redundant actually because you can't really put it on display, but it is lovely that they thought of this detail nevertheless. It also has the puffy collar as well, which is very nice, and if we look at some detailing on the back of the jacket, we can see the black piping there as a separate piece. We can see, of course, the end of that sort of insignia going to the back of the shoulder, which I think looks really cool. And then if we look at the sleeves, we can see some added detail, stuff that has been embroidered in, but also some extra materials that denote rank and insignia around the cuffs there. These are separate pieces that are sewn in, and again, just give it a little bit more depth, which I think is really, really nice and quite rich, and makes the overall costume seem quite sumptuous looking. Meanwhile, the Star Trek insignia, both on the pin badge at the top of the uniform and also on the cummerbund on the belt there, these are both painted in, but they're painted in with a metallic gold paint, so again, looks quite rich. And I think it's important to stop and take note of the amount of different materials that have been used on this costume. We have lovely bits of cotton, we have this thicker cotton of the main fabric of the costume itself, we have this sort of felt around the belt, and then we have these individual stringy bits as well. This is all really, really nicely layered and put together. Now, if we take a look at the hands, of course, these are the standard blocky hands that we're used to seeing, so they do look a little bit odd, and they're definitely a product of their time. Moving on to the legs, we can see that the trousers have this red piping, again, separate material, separate strand here running through them. Now this looks a little bit wavy, I'm not quite sure that's accurate, but nevertheless it's a really nice attempt, and it catches the light quite nicely as well, and overall enhances the look of the costume. And if we turn to look at the feet, we can see they've opted for the standard boots that we see in this line for the Starfleet characters. Now, these boots are sculpted in and then painted. This is pretty cool if you like the figure to look a lot more in proportion. We've seen how other figures of this time, most notably the Star Wars 12-inch line, would opt for rubber boots that would go over the leg. They would look a little bit out of proportion and a bit silly, and they would really make the figure imbalanced and make them struggle to stand up on their own 2 feet. This approach obviously makes them a lot more solid, and it looks perfectly in proportion. So I personally prefer this approach, although it doesn't make them quite as customizable. The only other thing I would note about this particular figure, though, is the fact that the trousers on this figure don't quite come down long enough to meet those boots. So whenever you decide to pose it, there is a danger that those trouser legs will rise up significantly above the boot and show off a little bit too much leg. So this is a constant battle. It feels like they were just ever so slightly too short. So, taking a look at the articulation, there is a straight swivel at the top of the neck, so the head will spin all the way around 360 degrees, but there is no ball joint here, it literally does just swivel from side to side. There are ball joints, however, in the shoulders, so the arms will lift up and they will twist around, and then you'll notice there is a single joint at the elbow as well, allowing that forearm to bend to about 90 degrees. There's another swivel this time at the wrist, allowing that hand to rotate all the way around. Again, sadly, no ball joint here. But surprisingly, there is a ball joint in the waist, which will allow the figure to turn from side to side, but also lean left and right, which is absolutely fantastic. So you can actually get some pretty decent motion here, and the figure will even bend forwards and backwards a little bit as well. It's not a huge amount, but it does make a difference. There's another ball joint in the hips, allowing the legs to kick out to the side, they can kick forwards, and they can kick backwards. And then finally, there is one more point of articulation, which is a single joint in the knee, allowing that lower leg to kick back to about 90 degrees. Sadly, there are no accessories with this figure at all. There's not a phaser, there's not even a communicator, which is disappointing, but then I think I can understand why. Given that these were exclusive figures, that there was only the Kirk and there was the Spock, I guess they didn't feel it was worth moulding brand new accessories, because of course the communicator and the phaser are quite different from their classic series figure and very different from the next generation figures that came, so it didn't probably make a lot of sense to spend a lot of money retooling and creating brand new accessories when they probably suspected they weren't going to finish out this line and flesh it out anymore. But it is, in hindsight, a real shame, because the costuming is absolutely fantastic on this figure, and I have to say, I really like it. I've got a lot of time for this figure, despite the likeness not being 100% and despite not having any accessories. Overall, this is a really fabulous looking figure, and that comes down to the costume, I think, more than anything else. And I'm really glad to have this one in my collection. As I said, it's quite difficult to get hold of, and I sadly don't have the Captain Spock, I should say. I sadly don't have Captain Spock, but I would dearly love to track him down, because I think these two next to each other would be pretty special. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.